How are we all doing? We have a pretty special session today. Anneloes is going to be taking us on a journey. We'll just give one more minute for folks to show up. Did anyone feel like they want to do our grounding drop-in session today? Or did you actually plan one, Anneloes? Any type of meditation or something to drop in with?
Yeah, I can share, no problem. How are we doing with time, Reiki? So I just know how the time is.
We have 90 minutes that we run with, so 87 left. And we usually have about 5-6 minutes at the beginning to drop in and ground before we get going.
Okay, well, great. So I can be with you for 85 because I have to give another course right at 1:30. So yeah.
No problem. Well, then I will just pass it to you and we can kick this off right now and you can do the ground in and I'm sure people will show up by then and then you can get started. So maybe Wonderful. 5 minutes. Cool. So yeah, send it your way.
Okay, let's get started. So welcome everyone. If you're just entering, please mute yourself and relax and come into the space. If you want to put on your video, you're most welcome. If for this next centering exercise you want to keep video off, that's fine too. So just let's get present first into this beautiful circle. So take a deep breath in, connecting with your body, connecting with yourself, and breathing out and just letting go, allowing yourself to relax, to get present, and to be here now. Take another deep breath in and letting go, releasing any tensions that you may feel. And allowing your attention to return to you. Just call your awareness back to yourself here and now. Whatever you've been doing before, just let it go. And give yourself the permission for this time together to be really receptive, to be open to a new experience, to learn, to grow together, and also to contribute with your wisdom and your presence. Taking another deep, relaxing breath in. And letting go, breathing out, letting go of any tensions. Now become aware of life within you, how there is a deeper wisdom inside of you, which manifests as the wisdom of your body, the wisdom of your mind, the wisdom of your spirit, the wisdom of your consciousness. And how this wisdom of life is always present, even when we're not aware of it. And give your attention and give your intention to this wisdom within you, so it can regulate you, it can balance you, it can harmonize you, it can cohere you, and it can attune you to the essence of who you really are. And this beautiful wisdom of life is what's helping you to thrive. This wisdom of life is the power of regeneration within you, and is also the wisdom with which to regenerate our worlds, our relationships, our cultures and systems. This wisdom of our thrivability is always here to guide us. And you can ask this wisdom if it can reveal to you anything you need to be aware of or release, whatever you don't need to hold on to. Make this wisdom your friend, your partner on this journey. And the more you call upon it, the more it becomes present within and around you. Nurture that relationship with your thrivability and the wisdom of thrivability. And how you can steward that wisdom in our world and for the future generations. And may this wisdom today be our guide. When you're ready, may complete this practice by slowly opening your eyes, moving your shoulders, your arms, your feet, being fully present here and now. So we are ready to begin. And now it would be lovely to see you all. So please, if you can, put on your video. That's great. So today we're going to take a deep dive into thrivability, some of the science behind it, and also to explore the next steps. And we may only get through half of what I prepared. But that's okay, because then there's next opportunities over the coming weeks. So just want to check in, Reiki, are you okay for me to dive right in? Or is that a check-in that you wanted to do first?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, take us away.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So there is a lot that I want to share with you, and it links in also to, of course, the Seeds Constitution, as well as the game guides that you've all been working with. And so I'm going to share with you some of the key teachings behind thrivability first, and then we'll open it up for conversation. But if there are any questions, feel free to, or comments, just write it in the chat. I'm probably not going to be reading that chat while I'm sharing the slides with you, in particular because it's so small for me also read, and I don't want to get distracted. But I will read it as soon as I stop the slide. So feel free, to put your notes and your thoughts there. It's also nice to read about this as ways of reflections and learning from each other. Okay. So let's see. To the side. Good. Can you all see this? I can't hear you, so I'm assuming it's yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Our beautiful Mother Earth. That's why we're doing it all. Now, this is a diagram with a lot of information. It comes, in fact, out of 5 years of PhD research at the Maastricht Sustainability Institute at the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands, based on the case study research in Mauritius and elsewhere. I'm calling all of you, talking to you now from Mauritius, which is a small island in the Indian Ocean, where we are very much confronted also with the need for regenerative economics, education, and governance, because as a small island confronted with the climate emergency impacts can be severe, as you can imagine, not only through huge cyclones, but of course also sea level rise. So what you're looking at here is really telling the story of what is the problem today, based on how we've been growing our societies, our economic systems in particular, and what could we be learning from living systems instead. So when you're looking at the bottom of, and you will be getting all of those slides, so don't worry trying to zoom in too much, but at the bottom of the slides, what it's telling you there is that for, let's say, the last 6,000 years, starting with our empire growth models, humanity has been growing and developing itself and its societies. And I'm talking about those who've been following this empire growth model, not so much indigenous societies, but those who wanted rapid growth, dominance, and control. They've been using these 5 kind of approaches that you're seeing completely at the bottom left, as extractive expansion, taking from the earth, based on a very mechanistic scientific view of a universe of separate parts and particles that are held together by mechanistic laws and principles, and also been creating systems of hierarchy and very mechanistic imposed goals. And so all using really nature, we know the story, using nature, extracting from nature and each other in order to grow a very hierarchical model. Now, we know and we understand that that's not sustainable, and even more so, we are, because of that, now in a trajectory of collapse. And as the IPCC said a couple of weeks ago, this is code red for humanity. Well, we've known about this problem for a long time. That there have been so many. We've been warning and warning for so long. We have to find a different way. So despite knowing the problem, knowing the danger, knowing the urgency, we are still heading towards at least 2 degrees warming. That's already committed just because of the delay in the system. But we're actually heading towards 3 or 4 degrees. And so now really we have to radically redesign our systems and our assumptions. And that's not just a technological question, that is also redesign the very assumptions on which we've been growing our civilizations. So it's a major transformation, major change process that is absolutely necessary. But if we were looking even deeper into why have those systems that are so destructive and that look to promise modernity, look to promise development, look to promise a greater ease and quality of life, why are they not delivering that? And what's really at the core of all of this? And then what we can see, it's like these systems, they are missing an operating system within it that's based on the understanding of living systems. So these are systems that don't have stops, they don't have breaks, they keep going. And the only pattern where we're seeing that in nature is with viruses and bacteria. But viruses actually play a catalytic role in nature, and they help healthy new mutations. And bacteria are absolutely important to break things down. And yet our own viral growth pattern as humanity isn't really serving much. So we need to do it differently. And that's where the middle part of the story of the green dots and the blue dots, that's really based on the research of, but what are then the conditions of healthy living systems, and what kind of growth archetype is in healthy living systems, and what behavior do we see then? So we're seeing that the behavior of a system is the result of its deeper archetypes, its structures, its algorithms, but also consciousness itself. Then we also understand that we can't change the behavior of unsustainability by simply telling people to consume less. That's not going to work. And what we're doing in seeds, of course, is a beautiful example of experimenting with different growth models, different algorithms, different attractors, different self-balancing loops, as well as a deeper educational process that we're all part of, where we're learning together and collaborating together. And that brings me then really to where you see the purple circles in this story. And what it says there is thrivability, Bildung. Now, Bildung is a concept that really came out of Germany and was then adopted by all the Scandinavian countries. It was based on its success model, which is talking about the human development, whereby the growing freedoms and growing responsibilities go hand in hand. So you can't separate them from each other, and how to every outer development is a component of an inner development and vice versa. So that's really the building story of development and education that also has been left out and lost in a lot of countries. And then the pink circles is really the civilizational story, which is also what we're seeing in the seeds vision and constitution, is to really saying, how can we become a thrivable civilization that is regenerative by design, and what do we need for that? So we're going to take a deeper dive into then, how do we transition then from the state in which we are now, where we're heading for collapse, major ecosystemic collapse, civilizational collapse, lots of conditions of breakdown, but also how can that be providing the conditions for the breakthrough and the emergence of whole new ways and systems. So when we're zooming in again on that story of these mechanistic ways of seeing the universe and life, and the narratives of separation and competition, and that's again, that's zooming in on this story, and we know the behaviors that we've seen from that, and we've all had our own experience of that sense of disconnection, and countries going into agendas of protectionism and domination, conflict, countries and cultures very divided and polarized, and of course also very harmful forms of competition and exclusivity. So we want to get out of that. And here, we do believe that we can. by embarking on that transformational journey, by what you're doing, all of you. And that's this story then. So what we can learn from living systems. Some of those terms are a little bit technical. I can share with you always the dissertation itself, which you can read to take a deeper dive in. But let me just try to translate this a little bit in a way that makes more sense. And that's that living systems are whole and unified. And for those who were part of the earlier Seeds Constitution sessions, you may remember I've been talking about this again and again. Yeah? So that if you're taking that life is a unified reality, and that the informational architecture of life, of living systems, of ourselves is unified, is whole, is fractal, then what we see in a living system is that wholeness as a principle, that wholeness as potential actually becomes embodied. And that means that life has this amazing way of making sure that all the informational flows and dynamics get integrated into living systems. What happens is if information doesn't become embodied, it doesn't become integrated into a living process, then it can also not be regulated and balanced by that living process. So what we're seeing in our human-made system is that most of the information that we're using to drive our economic, financial, population growth is not embedded in a living system process. It's therefore not balanced by it. It's not regulated by it. We don't feel the feedback from it, and it turns destructive. So it's incredibly important that when we are designing with information, that creates also complexity, that complexity is balanced. Another metaphor or principle in which you can see that, for example, is all these greenhouse gas emissions. You know, when they are in the lower atmosphere, it's driving the global warming. But our plants and trees taking these emissions and then bury them into the root system, so there becomes useful. So life has found all kinds of ways for placing information or components of life into its processes, and it's only when we start to disrupt that balance and it becomes free riders, free radicals, literally, that it becomes destructive of the system, because life is interdependent, and when we are not embedding it into the living systems, it starts to take on an agenda of its own, and then it drives towards collapse. Now, you could say that collapse is an intelligence of life to make sure that something that is not sustainable will die out. Yeah? But it's a rather harsh way for us to evolve. So I think it's time for humanity to get on with the program of life and choose a more gentle way for us to evolve. In the Seeds Constitution, we have the Thrivability Compass. So again, for those who've been part of also the assemblies, the Constitution assemblies, you may recall this. If you haven't been part of that, I really recommend watching the last ones on the Seeds YouTube channel, and the beautiful conversations that emerge from that. So the whole part one of the Seeds Constitution is based on these compass designs. What you're seeing here in this compass, and starting with the little rose in the center, is that principle of unity and wholeness. And why is a compass important? Is because, you know, it's like if you're walking in a forest and you've lost track and you don't know where you're going. The faster you're walking in the wrong direction, the more it's going to take to retrace your steps. Yeah, so we've been running kind of towards a cliff for quite some time, and it's time to know, where are we now? Where are we heading for? What are we navigating for? Where is that driving us? And if that's not the right direction, not only to retrace our step, but first of all, slow down, you know, get aware of the situation. In this compass, you will see that these little dots, little white dots in each next concentric circle of the compass. So what it's telling you is, when you understand the first step, so you understand, you start with unity, you start with wholeness. The next step, that's actually the 5 archetypes, and we'll go through that in a minute. But then if you build on your foundation on healthy ground, you're building your foundation based on really core and deep values, based on these living system principles, that gives you also the foundation to take your next step. In other words, if your foundation within and your assumptions and your values are really aligned with life and they're really healthy, so they're thrivable and regenerative, then from that foundation, you can expand in a fractal manner. But if your foundation is really wonky and you're missing some essential steps and wonky, out of balance, you're going to go run faster and you want to expand and go further. Well, guess what? You're taking that imbalance with you and you're driving that imbalance out into life. And you're driving that also, that imbalance, then into other areas of life that causes harm for others. And so it's so important that the way that we expand, the way that we fractal out, the way that we, as in Seeds, we're talking about scaling, the way that we're scaling, that we're doing this on the right assumptions, and that we make sure that our kind of deeper archetypes of growth, our foundations, that are really rooted within the intelligence and the wisdom of life, as well as these, what I shared earlier, these regulating, balancing informational loops, so that we're getting the right feedback towards how we grow and then develop and then evolve. What you also see in this compass is that in the next concentric circle, there are more dots there. Yeah, so what it's showing you that is in that direction of expansion that we will be diversifying. So also if seed is serving as that DNA, and that DNA can evolve, and we're seeing these new iterations, that these new iterations and new circles and new DHOs are popping up and emerging because of the principle of diversification, which is the base of evolution, and not because of separation. And well, I don't like it. I don't really feel that this is my place here. So guess what? I'm going to copy everything else. I'm going to set up my own. Well, we know that story, but that's not a generative story. So I want to make sure, therefore, that by design, we allow for the diversification, but in such a way that what is diversified remains part of the ecosystem. And that is really vital for the questions of governance where we're up to now. So for example, if projects are asking for funding from seeds, but they're not part of the ecosystem, so what they're doing is falling out of the ecosystem of seeds, it's not regulated and balanced by the informational, the feedback loops of seeds, what's being learned is also not going back to the system. Then what we're actually doing is that we are in some ways promoting this separating out, and we are creating a fractured design rather than fractal. So all of what we're going through here is really, really essential for the next steps of deciding together, how do we grow? How do we scale? How do we expand? Do we want to make sure that even if we don't have a central organization, that the ecosystem of seeds is that embodying context? So that is then where we are kind of growing and building these new civilizations. And so let's explore that in more depth. So here you see a picture of a torus, and more and more what they're finding out is that it looks like the shape of the universe is a huge donut. You could say it has toroidal flows. What is white on the screen here, you can actually see is consciousness itself. That is not in space-time. And what we're seeing as a torus here, that's our local reality. And so whatever we are growing within that local reality in the physical world, will go through also the toroidal dynamics. And it's for that we really need a compass, but it's always learning from and potentialized by the larger consciousness that is non-local within which this is taking place. So you could see that consciousness as a field has this capacity to localize itself, to physically manifest itself within, and then we are kind of in this torus, and it's there inside it then. So that we really need to learn then, how do we grow in a way that is evolutionary, that is regenerative, and that is thrivable. So here I have placed the compass now on top of the torus, and it is going to go and sink into it to help guide. And that's where the seeds constitution, article by article, can help guide those decisions. And when do we need to integrate? When do we need to step back? When can we expand? What is our next step right now? How do we create an attractive thrivability? But also, how do we create a boundary condition when we're saying, oh, stop, no, not in this direction? In the seeds constitution, we have constitutionalized in Article 3 the 3 principles of life. I won't go through that in depth here. Please read up if that is new for you. And a kind of simpler way to memorize that is how I like to think of it as 3 laws. And the first law is the law of existence, and which tells us that life is unified, that the universe itself is a unified entity. There's also underlying that the law of thermodynamics, which can be interpreted as a law of infodynamics. Again, it's a bit too complex to go in depth on that now. We just want you to know that the first law of existence tells us about the unity of life. The second law of change, again, following the same patterns of the laws of thermodynamics and laws of infodynamics, will help us to understand how then does life change. So we're seeing then the spiraling motion. That's why you see that out of the little dot, out of that dot of unity, that pixel wholeness, comes this spiraling movement, but the spiral works in both directions, expands out and comes back in. So it can, just like our heart, just like our lungs, just like the tides, in and out and in and out. So when it goes back in, all the diversity now needs to integrate, out of which then comes a new cycle. So it's very important that we understand that change as an evolutionary process unfolds through increasing complexity. So we are now in the universe story where out of this simple kind of unity and potential, universe has been expanding. So with space expanding in the flows of time. So it's been going in this kind of tunnel direction. You could say the torus on its side. So that means in this story of our universe, in this pattern, is that we find that life will still become more and more complex. It doesn't mean complicated, but it just means it's going to diversify more and more. And therefore, it's so important that we understand also how to be collaborative with that diversity and not divided like we've been doing for all those hundreds of years, or trying to destroy it. And that brings me then to the law of balance. So the third law, then you see now there's a boundary around the spiral, and that's so important because that boundary is also what in the seeds design we're working with as respecting autonomy and the principle of autopoiesis, which is self-creation, self-regulation, and adaptation. So all living systems have those kind of 3 key qualities. It can self-generate its components. It is able to regulate also itself, its behaviors, and its relationships. If it doesn't do that, if it can't regulate, it collapses. And it can adapt also to new situations. And so these 3 principles are really at the foundation, therefore, when we're working with decentralized, holonic, self-organizing principles like the DHO. So the question then, of course, is how we're going to apply all of that. And so there are now 3 key terms I'd really like to go through, because it's really at the essence of everything that we're doing here within and through seeds. So first then, as we've been using this word thrivability a lot now, within the word itself is the word ability. And with thrivability, what we're saying is that this ability, it's not given by someone to you. It is not ability that you will only acquire if you go through specific trainings or education. No, in life itself is an innate ability based on its qualities, based on those three principles, evolutionary principles we saw on the previous slide. So we are all born with an innate ability to thrive, but that cannot manifest unless the whole system is healthy. So it's not about, well, I am going to thrive and I don't actually care about you. Yeah. So it's about understanding that my thrive ability is interdependent with your thrive ability, which is interdependent with the thrive ability of our planet, of life as a whole, of this part of the galaxy, and so forth and so forth. So it's the inability to thrive. But now there is a little bit of inner work by developing our capacities as well. Yeah? So it's not enough for it to just be potential. Potential is given, but then by developing our capacities and then actualizing those potentials in ways that are generative and life-affirming and future creative. So what you can see already, if you are developing your capacities for harm, for competition, and so forth, you're actually not developing your thrive abilities. Then the next one is regeneration, which of course is at the heart of everything we're doing here. That's the act of improving and enhancing a place, system, relationship. But with what? Well, with the healthy flows and thrivable conditions for life. Within regeneration is implied also the word Renaissance. Renaissance meaning the rebirth, the capacity to rebirth, to be renewed, is part of regeneration. And you can also use the word regeneration without RE in front of it. So then we can say life is generative. It generates its conditions for thrivability. Not only it's regenerative towards what was there before, but it's also new generative. It creates new futures. And then sustainable development, of course, we're going further than sustainability, but still it's important that we understand the foundations of sustainable development, given that we're on a trajectory of unsustainability. And this is where, in this process of development, that meets the needs of present generations without compromising also the future generations and their thrive abilities. And it's in part of that stories we have to now understand a little bit about what are then threshold boundaries. And so that's understanding that our earth and also we ourselves, we have boundaries, thresholds of our carrying capacities. If you go over that, then we are creating the conditions for harm and for illnesses. And these boundaries, they're always there, but most of the people don't realize it until you hit against one. So they're not like a solid wall. This is a boundary that's like an informational structure of your interdependence, and not independence. That's so carefully that wisdom that we started with fine-tunes how the whole of you can harmonically work together. And that means also that if there are elements of the whole are compromised or sacrificed, it's going to affect boundaries. So if we are destroying our forest and we're destroying the ocean and harming the ocean, we are affecting also the threshold boundaries of our whole planet, and therefore also our collective conditions for us to thrive. The systemic boundaries, they emerge from the evolutionary coherence of a living system. Now that's a whole teaching in itself to go through. But what I want you to know for right now about evolutionary coherence is that this capacity of life to fine-tune, to get a sense of its unity and wholeness, to be able to understand and community, almost like an invisible conductor of an orchestra. And that we could say is the evolutionary coherence of life. And that's not imposed, that is not centralized, it's always emergent. And so this evolutionary coherence, and it's also safeguards through this fine-tuning process, the systemic interdependencies in service of the thrivability. Thresholds then are these boundary conditions that delineate between sustainable and unsustainable ecological and social systems. And this is where you may have heard a lot about tipping points that are now destructive tipping points are setting motions, when the system goes towards a collapse situation or phase shift in such an unpredictable, nonlinear way that we actually don't know how it's going to balance itself in a new state. And a systemic barrier then is when you started the first slides and you saw at the bottom these degenerative, destructive growth models. Well, that's what the story of systemic barriers. So when we are creating systems that harm the interdependencies of living systems, then we become a barrier for life to thrive. Yeah? So when we're imposing goals and dynamics that also harm this deeper unity, the evolutionary coherent development of life, yeah, and the interdependencies, then we really start to create systemic barriers. Most of the sustainability problem is a barrier problem, and yet we're always talking about it as if it's a boundary problem. And that's a conceptual mistake, because when we don't address the barriers, then we harm the boundaries. But the boundary problem only emerges because we are not addressing and we're not making visible how our growth patterns create systemic thrivability barriers. And that's this story. I won't go into it in depth here, just to say that these 7 systemic barriers came out of 5 years of research to see what kind of informational patterns are really causing this barrier for life to be regenerative and to renew, both within ourselves as well as also within life as a whole. And these are 7 transformation strategies that were addressed and tested through case studies to address these barriers. Again, there's a lot more I can share with you for reading if you want to go deeper into that. But all of that thinking is also at the foundation, again, of the Seeds Constitution. You may have also seen in the Seeds Constitution, Article 4, how there is this pillar of 5, yeah, really as 5 protocols and 5 foundations. And that's here, that's based on this story. So the wholeness coded of future creative, revolutionary catalyst, pattern weaving, new paradigm storyteller. So these are 5 future archetypes of, when we looked at that compass and how does the concentric circle move to the next stage and the next and the next, in a way that the complexity is evolutionary and regenerative, but underlying that there are archetype patterns. And so these are names that have been given to archetypal patterns for bringing in and actualizing the potentials of, you could almost say, a whole new cycle of time, a new cycle of consciousness, a new way in which to envision our own role as humans here on this planet. And in the Seeds Constitution, what we've done is we found the equivalent for that in terms of its SOS, its operating system. So that means that the first principle then for the operating system of seeds is therefore the guidance also in terms of governance of how is seeds architecting codes and protocols. The second core principle net is really that the operating system of seeds itself needs to be able to enable these future possibilities, needs to be future creative, creating possibilities for life to thrive in a continual way. And the third one is then that seeds also, as an ecosystem, needs to support the development of our capacities. And how do we do that? As learning journeys like the one we are on now. And then the fourth pillar of that is saying that, okay, but then seeds as an ecosystem also needs to be integrated, and working with the pattern that connects, that we have in ecosystems where all of the species are in a collaborative and co-creative dance together. So seeds itself needs to be integrative, collaborative, and building those bridges, not only within its own self, but also with the larger world, and including the systems and cultures that are dying and that need help or need to be hospiced in the transition. And then the fifth one is really about us all as storytellers, and how do we as seeds, as an ecosystem, communicate now this unity, this thrivability? How do we also communicate the stories that are emerging, as well as the possibilities, just again part of building these bridges, and as this beautiful butterfly, fertilize the world around us with these new possibilities. And on the compass, that's this part of the story. So we're really at the heart of the compass now, the heart of seeds. We're really at the foundation. So that means also when we are having to, in governance or design, new algorithms or protocols, or make decisions about who to include and where perhaps to guide towards, oh, well, yes, maybe, but yeah, all of that is taking place at that part of the compass. That's where we use the seeds compass, the constitution as a compass for making those decisions, making sure our foundations are healthy, and then we can step to the next concentric circle, which are our 8 values, which I'm not going through in this presentation, but please do read it up in the seeds constitution if you're not familiar with that. So I'm going to jump straight to the next concentric circle, which is the 13th. And the 13th, that is really the central dot, and then the 12 around it. That's Article 6. Now, this is so fundamental that I don't know how many deep dives you've had in this already, but this is really something that we need to kind of go through again and again and have conversations around, because there's so much we can continue to discover about that openly sharing knowledge, open source code, citizen governed, architecting from the future. So, and these are beautiful principles also for yourself, for your own personal development. I use them all the time in my own life. And where is that based on? Well, if you start to explore more deeply what are the principles or qualities of living systems, these are the 13 principles that when Reiki and I were working on how can we best articulate those core principles, that's what we came up with. There are many more, of course, but this is just that you know how it was translated. And that living system principles of unity, that life also architecturally in its design allows for choice. It's imaginal, it's interdependent, it's generative and self-creative, it's coherent, it's resonant, very important, and communicates through resonance. It's transformative, it's connective, it distributes its value, it's fractal, that's how it expands, it's fertile, how it creates conditions for new life, and it's constantly evolving. And that's that part where you see the green dots, or the turquoise dots in the compass. So we know that part of the story. So if you want to know in the ecosystem, if, for example, some of the diversity is getting destructive or polarized, well, then which of these 13 principles do we need to strengthen within our ecosystem? That brings me then to feedback loops for tipping point transitions. And that's really important, because if what we're working towards is also how can we create a new index, new templates, new ways to measure what we're doing, scoreboards, and all of those are creating feedback loops. So there's something to understand here about a feedback loop. What we're seeing is when a system is starting to shift to a new state, and living systems are nonlinear and complex. So what we're seeing in these phase changes between two different systems, like the ones we are in right now, is that prior to it shifting over, building up to that tipping point, and a tipping point is it's irreversible. Birth is a tipping point in that sense. You can't go back. You can't go and do that. Metamorphosis for the butterfly is a tipping point. It can't go back to caterpillar. So that moment when you have the tipping point, the shifting over point to a new state, prior to that, there is already a new feedback loop system that has been building. There's an informational architecture behind it, just like within the chrysalis, when the butterfly body is being built, the imaginal discs that becomes imaginal cells of the butterfly, they are already coordinating now the potentials of this dissolving body of the caterpillar that's turning into nutrient soup. So it's the butterfly that is creating new feedback loops. And this is so important for us to really consciously and by design work with, to better understand what do we measure, what are our indicators, where are our system boundaries of what we measure. And it also is the foundation for a whole new theory of change that I shared this with Hazel Henderson the other day. You may know her. She's really the, well, the grandmother of new economics, I want to say. It's amazing. And she said, oh, we need to work for critical mass. I said, no, Hazel, it's not critical mass. It's understanding coherence. When the coherencies of the new future states get stronger and there's a decoherence of the old states, that's when the potentials are there. So you're saying, yeah, that's it. Yeah, so we have another way of driving change. Why is this critically important? Is because if we still think that we have to go on the streets en masse in order to drive change, we are in a reactionary model. But if seeds itself can help mobilize the resources of the new by creating these ecosystems of coherence, and that coherence becomes stronger and a greater attractor, while there is already the decoherence happening. The decoherence of the old, there's not much we have to do for that. The collapse dynamics itself take care of that. But bringing in the coherence of the new at the same time can serve as the attractor to tip now the engagement of humanity, the support of humanity, the investment of humanity into these new systems like seeds. And then we need to embed it also, as I started our story with, in concrete new realities and opportunities for people. So that brings then, if we want to be designing frameworks for the seeds governance, then there's some things, some deeper thought work we need to be doing together. And for example, about funding criteria, which projects and initiatives are eligible for seeds funding and engagement and will join the seeds ecosystem. And I understand there's a whole new way currently for thinking about funding, that it's no more just funding some individuals, but really funding the ecosystem itself within, so that it remains embedded and part of that ecosystem. A thrivability index that which you're developing. So also, how is it going to help us to collectively decide which projects have regenerative tipping point potential from how we understand tipping point potential now, and can contribute also to the seeds ecosystem, as well as this larger story of this transition to a new civilization. How do we make sure that they're aligned with seeds protocols? So how do we screen for that alignment with Article 6 of the seeds constitution? When we're working with a thrivability impact scoreboard, also how can we measure what happens not just before but after? So there's two states of measurement. One, when people want to join or they're requesting for financial support or other forms. And then there is when people are part of the ecosystem, these projects are happening on the ground. How do we measure what is the impact of these projects within its community, its larger community, the ecosystem of seeds, and more. So just putting this here for us to talk about soon and to start to deepen our thinking around that. When we are creating indexes and scoreboards, also ask ourselves, what's the purpose of the measurements and the feedback? So there's feedback, for example, for making decisions. There's feedback for driving change, and this is all about tipping points. There's also, and it's really important, feedback for learning and development. That means that how can we make sure that what we're measuring and evaluating goes back to everyone in a meaningful way, so we can all learn from that? And that it's not just people who are doing the measurements that are knowing what's going on. How can it serve to also have governance? But if governance is decentralized, how does it then feed into these decentralized hubs? And how do we create feedback for engagement as well as for storytelling? And then the questions to ask together, to explore together: who joins the seeds ecosystem? Do we need perhaps a governance circle? How does the seeds ecosystem regulate its systemic boundaries and membranes? If we don't have that in place, we have it in the Constitution as a necessity. But how are we doing this for the next step now? And who and what in seeds is driving growth and development? How does it now as a system self-balance and select and decide? And what I would propose is that we do having some in-depth sessions around Article 6.4 and Article 6.5 in particular, the seeds constitution. Because there we are going to work then with these, the carrying capacities, the thresholds, the boundary conditions, as well as the caring capacities, yeah? The resilience and the health. And that's this part of the story. The top part that we've shown before is how do we also develop our capacities together for regeneration, thrivability, and create these whole new growth patterns, whole new growth archetypes. And in particular now, the governance. How does governance that's based on holonic, decentralized principles for regeneration and thrivability look like? So let me pause here so we can now have some time for conversation, and I can bring back any slides that you want. Who would like to share? Yes, Reiki.
I'm just gonna coordinate. Anneloes, that was incredible. Thank you. So if you have any thoughts, questions, feedback, anything at all, just put your hand up and we will go in order. Julia, yeah.
Thank you, Anneloes, for this amazing presentation. And the thing about feedback loops was really resonating with me. And what it resonates is that for us to move past this transition and the shifting, we are missing this safe space, you know, the cocoon maybe, where we can have these feedback loops gathered and have a space to process all the many kind of tensions that are emerging, so that we can shift past them. So I don't know exactly what I want from that expression, but I just wanted to voice that I miss that the safety of a space where, I mean, the Renaissance explorers are supposed to be generating the safety by having a clear process for the exploration groups. So maybe that's one thing that we could work on. So maybe having more clarity with the exploration groups and how they function and what is expected of them. So this could create the small holonic ways of having groups working in a safe way to produce incremental changes that will lead us to the next shift. So that's one.
That's beautiful. Yes.
Realization. Thank you.
I agree. It's so important, because if we don't have these safe spaces and we can't integrate, we can't learn. And you know, when there's information overload, then we start to feel stress, right? Stress is all about that. And so the stress in the system, it means indeed somewhere, not that integration, not the space, not being able to breathe. Yeah. Thank you.
Art, you did have your hand up, but you put it back down. Did you change your mind? Oh, there you are.
Just put it back up. First of all, it was a beautiful presentation. And I was curious to learn a little more in depth about the relationship between the symbol with the dots, and like how this relationship came into place with the Constitution and these different values.
That's nice. Yeah, well, the compass I've been working with for a very, very long time. So when we were working on the redesign of the first iterations of the Constitution, it was really the question then was, what is the deeper underlying structure for this document that is then coherent? So that, because there was so much information and so much complexity, but we felt like, but the structure is not there. We should have a natural progression again from the little dot, which is the purpose. Yeah, so we're starting with the purpose and what's given. So what's given to us is that unity, is consciousness itself. And then the question is then, how do we bring that into being? Well, not through duality. We've tried that. Doesn't work. Trinity. So this is where you then see that the three principles, the three laws. So this unity, this wholeness, the fullness of our potential, we bring it forth in life through a trinity. A trinity always goes through a creative process of the two that allows for a new one. That's the three in that way. But it also has the unity out of which the diversity comes. So within a trinity by design, you always have a place where it can converge, which is that what Julio was talking about, this integration space. Normal duality can't do that. It's here or there. So it doesn't come together. Yeah. And that's where you see these dots then really go on to the journey. How does a one become a two? The two becomes the three becomes the foundation for all things, like in the ancient wisdom it is said. And that what's then the next step of the five, going towards the eight. Some who are aware of sacred geometry will see the pattern there already of the 1, 1, 1, 3, the 5, the 8, the 13, the 16. So it's based on fractal design principles. Okay, see that Mila has a hand.
Hi, Anneloes.
Hello.
So I'd like to ask about the feedback loops and the tipping points and perturbations. So with regards to feedback loops, my understanding is for tipping points from a human perspective is also the paradigm shifts, the cultural shifts. So I see some of the feedback loops. I totally agree with everything that you say. What I'm missing is the nth order or the third order of feedback loop learning, which the first feedback is the feedback on the processes, on the actions, on the behavior. And then the second would be the assumptions that manifested those actions, behaviors, processes. And the third loop is then, what is the cultural context? What is the social construct? What are the beliefs? What are the paradigms that created those assumptions? And then that kind of continues to an nth order of loop, because we have so many subconscious layers that's been informed not only by our lived experience, but ancestral context. And rather than bringing all that to a new civilization, I'm wondering how is that integrated into the Constitution, and how do we experiment that into a real manifestation rather than just theory?
Yes, very good question. So that's in the 5 archetypes. So the 5 archetypes are also 5 stages of transformational change, both in terms of sequentially as well as in depth. So on the first layer, the code, this is the changing of the causal layers of the new choice points, the new coding, the new algorithms. The second one is in terms of our imaginal processes. And the third one is in terms of evolutionary capacities. That's the deep healing. That's just when we are sitting in the cocoon. This is when we have to work with the ancestral, the cultural, the memories of the collective, the healing of the trauma. Because yeah, that's when the caterpillar body of the old body of consciousness is going to have to dissolve. And there's that tipping point of the change over then from the old towards the new, where the new structures are starting to emerge, but there's still a lot of uncertainty for people because they don't have the lived experience yet of these new ways. And that's when the fourth archetype comes in, where we have weaving now the mycelium network, so that it's not top down, but through the mycelium root system, we are creating a new experience of what we mean by global. And then the fifth one is really the communicative now, the fertilizing factor, the being able to seeding that into the world. So these 5 stages, so the 5 states, 5 stages, and 5 sequences.
Yeah. So how can that be translated into practical terms? Like in terms of if we were a group and going through those 5 archetypal stages.
Yeah, so what you can do is,
that we can do that on.
Exactly. So what you can do is, if you wanted to work transformation, say that you go to your community and they need to see where things are stuck and where new things have to be introduced. You can have one session specifically in exploring from a code level, from a design perspective, what needs to change. Then the next one is, let's imagine, to go through a group collective imaginal process. How would these future possibilities look like? How does it live within each of us? What are perhaps also fears or assumptions that we may have? So you have a second session specifically on that. Third session, you go as a group, a community together and saying, okay, that's really nice. And we love these new possibilities, but we're missing some capacities as well. So what are the capacities in learning and development? I can share that with all of you. As from the 7th of September, I developed an educational transformation blueprint with 7 learning perspectives for regeneration, thrivability. It's 200 pages of practices and ways of how to do that, which I can't share with you in 5 minutes, but that is all open for the public soon. And then the next one after that is saying, well, how do we collaborate? Who do we need to reach out to? Who do we need to engage? How do we create the partners and the allies on the quest? Yeah. And then, the 5th one is really, how do we living that and nurturing that together? That's also part of when we have the 16 commitments and seeds. There are 16 commitments in the Constitution that serve as a pledge. So you can, as a group learning, you can go through them pledge by pledge, because those 16 pledges, which is the outer ring of the compass, brings into being now the values, the principles, the vision, the purpose. So that's where that is. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Anneloes.
Great. Anyone else who would like to share? And I would love to hear also from all of you, for the design of a Thrivability index or a scoreboard, where are you all in that process? How can we collaborate for that next step? Suddenly very quiet. Like, can you give us some insight where where you're all at in that process, so we can work on that for the next steps?
Sure. It's the person who's carrying the index forward on the call. I forget who that is. Yeah, I actually don't know if they're present here. So does anyone have any insight on who's carrying that forward?
I believe we're talking about the regenerative valuation here that Tina started the thread about. Yeah, I've been participating in that thread. Has been introduced, and we've had a few introduction messages. I've been suggesting a few mathematical suggestions, but we haven't gotten really far, I would say. It didn't get much farther than an introduction, but I could share the link to the thread.
Yes. I'm just putting my email here. You can also follow up with me and send it, because I would like to, because I'm working on that. but I want to make sure I'm working with you. I don't want to just design something, say, oh, well, here it is. I want to make sure that as you're all going through the deep work, that all of your insights, are part of this process, and that we're really doing that together. Because I think that's really it's the next step. I've been working with Stephen Gomes and Joachim and Ayesa on kind of a governance index for thrivability. But that's, to me, not the same as what we can use elements of that, but that looks really at 3 indicators of care, of love and trust. And that's going to be piloted soon in a project in South America. And there it's really looking how much kind of do people feel that they have a trust in the governance of the project that they're asked to be participants of, how much do they feel that this project is going to look after their needs as well, but it doesn't really have yet the indicators, I feel, for also regeneration. So here what we want to, if we want to go to a new model where not the old financial or funding model, but a new model, we need to find a simplified way whereby everyone in the community here can be part of the decision of what gets funded, and how do we know if some of a project is aligned with what we're saying we want to support in the Constitution. So what is its potential? What are the criteria that we need to have? So what data and information need to be supplied? But then also, how do we give people the tool to now have a continual evaluation of their work for them to understand if what they're doing is, one, sustainable, 2, regenerative, and ultimately thrivable.
So I just shared the link in the chat. So you can take a look there at what has been written. And I personally would love to be engaged in the whole regeneration, regenerative valuation process. So
very good. Yeah.
Would love to, if you share anything.
Yes. Is your email there as well, or how can I reach out to you? So maybe anyone from here who wants to be part of a Zoom call where we're going to take another deep dive into that, please email me. I've put my Gmail there, and I can then coordinate a little call around that. Great. Anyone else who likes to add to that?
Well, we have also been working with the idea of creating this dashboard that's also called the pulse, that's going to have the people, planet, and prosperity kind of measurements that we can track and follow, and that can help the explorers and the whole seeds ecosystem to know how healthy we are in terms of reaching the regeneration, and how close are we to making seeds go to the next level of starting the harvest. And so that's one important piece in the puzzle to give us more transparency and visibility. So this is this is one of the other projects that's coming along.
That's a good idea. I mean, from Guy as well. Good. So Julio, could you join that call if we're going to take a deeper dive into how does a scoreboard or an index? Yeah. So I'm just looking at how can we do one work rather than having everyone doing their work in silos, so we can truly be collaborative, and also to see it from the following perspective. If you really look around everywhere, I mean, of course, we have the governance for SDGs, but I don't think that's guiding us to where we need to go. What we don't have is truly a holonic or decentralized form of governance for regeneration and thrivability. Yeah? In a way that the governance itself is a learning experience, and it's not a directive experience of this yes and that no, because that's the kind of governance that people don't want anymore. So there's a process where the new democracies, liquid democracy, new forms of governance, and then for regeneration and thrivability, I see that seeds is positioned to be a major experimentation for that. And when I'm part of other conversations and groups and networks as well, this seems to be the missing link in many of the places. So I'd like to see how we could, as seeds, not only do this for ourselves, but also as a case study to give an answer to that larger question of how then do we govern for regeneration and thrivability. Mila, I see that you have your hands up. Yeah. No,
I wanted to check in that conversation. I know that Anneloes, you're also involved with Indigenous elders.
Exactly.
Or how do we bring Indigenous elders and Indigenous people's wisdom, because they have timeless wisdom, and merge that with the modern wisdom that we have, because we need both. It's not either or.
Exactly. So when I've worked with governance a long time with Chief Elaine, we worked with these 16 Indigenous guiding principles. Yes, exactly, from the Forward International Institute. And these were as the foundation for circles, talking circles around these topics.
Yeah.
So maybe there's one way in which you can embed these talking circle principles to support then the collective governance and stewardship. And at the same time, also we need to explore what's the equivalent of that in technology. Yeah, so how does that work in a digitalized way? Yes.
There's Chief Lane and there's Appella, who's also an academic in
Yes.
this thinking world, and also the Turtle Island Institute. So they're all really some female elders who are leading the way from the elders' wisdom, from a systemic lens, and also bringing the Indigenous wisdom.
So can we have a call maybe with them? So
Yep.
bring them all into this conversation and do a deep learning from them and let them.
And I think I'm going to be a bit controversial, because I also feel that it's the ecosystem for diversity, the unity in diversity. We also need inclusivity, as Julio said yesterday. Just, basically, it's about bringing also female leaders and not just white male-dominated systems. And we need all the voices. And I think we also can learn from developing countries, because with a lack of resources, they're very resourceful. So that's something that I think needs to be considered, and not just be driven by the kind of colonialism, imperialist attitude that's the white male dominated or female white Western world that has all the wisdom and all the thinking, and actually bringing all of the diverse is actually going to make us thrive.
That's it. That's it. It's essential. And that's why, I mean, I know how it's not easy for me introducing seeds in Mauritius. We are a developing country. Yeah, so many people don't even use internet, let alone a passport on a phone. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm from Indonesia, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I would like that. I don't know, Reiki and others were coordinating the sequences of the sessions, but I think what you're suggesting is really important. And if you can have a conversation about this with all of them, it would be a huge opportunity for all of us to learn. Yeah. Michael.
Thanks for the presentation, Anneloes. I appreciated a recap of that. One of the things we're doing in South Africa is figuring out ways to practically apply what you've presented in your thesis and what you've discussed today. So specifically around this idea of Indigenous people and dashboards. So what we've done is gone out to, first of all, we started with a collection of all of the different groups working for change in South Africa, and we've put out an invitation to them. We're calling it Event 911. which is loosely based on Event 201, which was the simulation of what happens in a pandemic. And so we're saying there's a lot of tension in South Africa at the moment. So we're calling it Event 911 because it's a bit of an emergency and we're trying to avoid anarchy in the country. But ultimately saying to each person, each leader of these different groups, bring what is important for you to measure, because they all have these different views on what needs to be done. So that will inform the formation of a dashboard here, which is difficult to talk about. It's not difficult to talk about in theory. It's actually very easy, but it's to capture what is important to the individual cultures and viewpoints, specifically in South Africa. So that's the one thing we do. And then the other is to recognize the Khoisan in South Africa is one of the oldest tribes that are known. You know, many people think that our original DNA came from the Khoisan people. They're also one of the few remaining values-based society, as opposed to class-based society, which is, you know, causes this whole pyramid structure. And so we're celebrating the fact that they are not a class-based society in part of gathering all this information. That's kind of a bit of a dump from my side. I just wanted you to be aware of some of the things that we're doing here. Mila is helping us a lot in getting those things off the ground. But we just feel that by actually going out and making mistakes and doing something in the real world, we're going to get much better feedback into the ecosystem of seeds.
That's great. I mean, two things I'd love if you can present where you are at with that, so we can all learn from that. And also if you can join the conversations around this indexing and scoreboard, that would be really great. I don't know if you have time for that. That would be really good. I'm taking that as a yes, Michael.
Oh, sorry, I was nodding my head, but maybe my video broke up. Yes, sounds good.
Wonderful, I'm happy. That's nice. And let me make sure I'm saving this chat because it's so rich. So I have 2 more minutes and then I got to hop off. I see, yeah, Apostle.
So I was thinking about, I was listening to what you're saying, which is very about the new system, very like positive, very collaborative, very using these models, etc. Right? Very good. And then, but then again, if we're doing this in that way, then how do we interface? How do we create the interface with the old system, in a sense? Because the old system don't care about these things, and the old system might like use their own like leverages and competitive advantages in order to basically like stay in power. Maybe that's the best phrase. So it's an interesting, I don't know, I'm not sure how to approach that.
So is a very important question you're asking. That's why I was asking, what is seeds as a feedback loop to that old system? So that's the first thing is how does seeds feed back into that old system? And then the secondly is that a lot of the systems of the old are radicalizing because there's a decoherence going on. So they're fracturing, they're infighting, so then how can seeds in that same time become a positive attractor for people who are actually fed up with that bickering and division and the polarization, and would be quite happy to transition over if they know that the new can also support them with some really basic conditions in life. And that's what I see, for example, the conversations in Mauritius as a developing country. People do want to also know, but is my basic needs in life, how can I, work with that? And how do I know it's not just a new ideology? And is it safe for me to invest my time in? So this is where I think we have to continue to work and to make it simpler for people to engage. Also how we tell the story of that. And we need to address what I've seen is that sometimes people are scared when they hear first, oh, it's a new currency. I always get this question. Is it Bitcoin? Is it safe? Is it going to be hijacked? Yeah. And so if we're only presenting ourselves as a financial solution, then some people are going, I'm not sure, am I going to be rolled into a new kind of scheme? And so I think we need to keep engaging with the other systems too and ask them, how do you perceive us? How do we come across? What is your sense? And to understand what they don't understand and for us to learn about that. And to keep building bridges. We have to keep building bridges. The caterpillar brings the butterfly forth. We need the caterpillar too, so yeah. Thank you. Right, yeah, I'll bring it back to you for completion because I have to hop off very soon. I really enjoyed spending time with all of you.
Sure. Does anyone else have anything left for Anneloes before she goes? Okay. Wow, that was an incredible session. Thank you, Anneloes. I think it was just a lot for people to take in, so maybe there's still a lot of digesting going on. I think this will be a very foundational video for helping people better understand the thinking and design that went into the Constitution as well. Yeah, so with that, maybe we can all unmute ourselves and we can just give you some gratitude and say thank you for whoever wants to do that. So thank you, Anneloes.
You're most welcome. Thank you all. And just let me know for the next session. Happy to.
Gracias.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, Alicia, one question before you go.
Muchas gracias. No, I wanted to say thank you. That's all. I put stuff in the chat. I think I saved the chat for the future.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to read the chat soon too. Thank you all. See you again
Thank you.
soon.
Thank you, Anneloes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.